afternoon. This is Melissa O'Brien, Executive Research Leader with HFS Research. And I'm joined here today by two very special guests. We've just completed a study from retail and CPG leaders across 605 enterprises in partnership with Genpact. And today we're here to discuss some of the study findings and get perspectives from our subject matter expert at Genpact, as well as from Conagra. So let me allow my two esteemed panelists to introduce themselves. Tracey, I'll start with you.
Hi, first, thanks for having me. I am Tracey Schaefer. I am the current Chief Information Officer at Conagra Brands.
Fantastic, thanks, Tracey. And we've also got Tarun.
Hi, nice to be here, and thank you for having me. Tarun Chopra, I run our consumer product goods segment in Genpact.
So without further ado, we'll jump into some of our study findings here and start to understand from Conagra and from Genpact's point of view how these things are actually panning out in the real world. But what our data found from the study, again, of 600 enterprises across retail and CPG firms globally, is this sort of perfect storm that's been brewing in the retail and CPG industries as, of course, backlash from pandemic and lockdowns and supply chain issues. And we've really got these sort of three tiers, or rather three components of operational disruption, supply disruption, and demand disruption. So it's really just sort of a perfect storm of challenges that we're seeing, which is exacerbated by recent events like a war in Ukraine and inflation and continued supply chain disruption. So maybe, Tarun, I can ask you to kick us off here and talk a little bit about your perspective on how organizations are approaching this dilemma.
I think the big difference that we're seeing now, Melissa, is the fact that over the last 3 years with the pandemic and then with the geopolitical issues, there was a lot of managing the supply chain and getting work done and getting daily activities done and stores being fulfilled or online D2C businesses being fulfilled. But now we're seeing a change because it's moving to where companies and CPG and retail companies are saying, how do we make it resilient in the supply chain world and start investing in transformation? It's a little behind than most of the organizations that we work with or industries, but it's coming to that part. On the other side, inflation has always been a hurdle and continues to be. So enterprises are looking for ways to get ahead of this, which means investing in innovation and technology that will drive faster innovation. All of our clients are looking to modernize functions, bring data and analytics to better predict versus to react what's on the horizon. And then changing consumer behaviors is also driving new business models, specifically direct to consumers. So if you think about that, it's all coming together whereby a lot of our clients are now moving towards the proactive, predictable world versus coming out of the reactive and possibly managing day-to-day issues to bringing responsiveness stronger. Final part is we've seen, I think, generative AI, which is now starting to become a huge potential for all of us CPG companies. And the big realization is that it's not only a productivity tool, but it's going to be one which drives faster cycle times, faster innovation, and ultimately driving improved customer and consumer satisfaction because all the data exists within the organization.
Yeah, important point there, Tarun, and hold that thought because I want to dive into Gen AI a little bit more further down the line. But for now, Tracey, I would love to get your perspective. I mean, how is Conagra dealing with these dilemmas, and how are you guys prioritizing, the different challenges and ways to innovate as well?
Yeah, I think one of the things we're taking forward kind of in the post-pandemic era is making sure those things that we learned we're capable of doing during the pandemic, that we know we can still do them in a post-pandemic. And I think, I've worked in CPG for 25 years, and it's taught me that agility is always the name of the game. And I think the last 5 years have probably been the truest test of that. The last 5 years for us has been finding completely new ways of doing things and letting go of some of what we thought had to be done in exchange for just new ways of executing. So processes that we maybe took for granted in the past suddenly became front of the room as things as simple as getting product to customers became, more and more important. So maneuvering through the recent supply chain disruptions obviously meant a lot heavier lean in on technology and automation than we had in the past. We learned to automate in areas we hadn't yet. We're probably on a checklist somewhere, but hadn't been done. And we learned how to do it in a really short amount of time. So, with controls always top of mind, it's been a balance of faster implementation and learning how to do that without sacrificing controls and security, because the latter can't be what falls off. And some of those learnings are what we are striving to make sure we carry forward into the post-pandemic era now.
Awesome. Yeah, a really, really condensed sort of period of time to do a lot of learning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things that we asked our respondents about within the study was about modernization priorities. And we looked at this both functionally, across horizontal functions as well as through technology. So, just focusing on the horizontals for right now, on the left side over here, we found that there was more maturity around modernization in sales and marketing, IT, HR. So kind of interesting to see. I mean, I think there's a there's definitely a priority for modernizing all corporate functions, but these seem to sort of have greater progress towards having achieved modernization in the sales and marketing, IT, and HR. So just curious, Tracey, for you to weigh in here on whether or not this would ring true at Conagra, and just any theories on why that's the case at all.
Yeah, I think all of those functions ring true for us as well. First, I don't really view modernization as having a start and an end. So it's constant and will go on forever. And I always tell my team, once you believe your modernization work is done, you probably are too. So it's really about modernization to us is about getting better every day. So we approach modernization with a really wide net that includes a lot of these functions. I would say the depth at which we invest is probably the biggest differentiator for us. So over the last couple of years, we've invested in modernizing our end-to-end demand and supply chain functions, how we better leverage massive amounts of data and technology to forecast demand, make the right amount of product. A bit closer in, we've had a lot of focus on digitizing our manufacturing environment. So connecting our lines, connecting our workers, and getting really rich data from our plant floors that we think will be a productivity unlock for us over the long term, especially when we start to think about new tools that we'll have under our belt with LLMs and how AI is advancing. And then finally, Conagra, innovation drives growth, which means constant modernization of our research and development functions as well.
Excellent. Excellent. And Tarun, I'd like for you to weigh in as well, in particular on the technology component of this, because cloud, SaaS, and cybersecurity are really levers that CPG and retailers are pulling to help drive modernization. So, what's been your experience on working with clients to help implement these technologies, and just any sort of best practices or particular, takeaways that you have to share there?
If you just pick up what Tracy talked about, is to bring a cohesive view across the organization through data and integrated tech, it becomes very clear that you have to provide the data, the linkages, and the insights ultimately across the various functions. So, whether it's sales and marketing, whether it's IT, whether it's human resources, the ultimate view is threading it all together, and that's what we call as horizontalization. So the technology serves as a means to an end. The end is business outcomes. How do you drive higher growth? How do you improve margins? How do you reduce leakages? And how do you continue to drive improved controllership? That's what we're seeing more and more. It's moving away from just leveraging technology to moving to business outcomes, and what is the appropriate technology and how does it bring together the front, the middle, and the back office across the CPG clients and the retail clients we work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I wanted to throw in here too, we fielded this well before the, sort of hype emerged from LLMs and Gen AI. I mean, these things have been around for quite some time, but the maturity has really accelerated over the last few months, and the discussion around the potential, again, the potential for outcomes, as you put it. So could you share a little bit about what you see as the potential for generative AI and sort of where it fits in here as an emerging tech?
Yeah, I think generative AI over the last 6 months in our consumer goods world and retail world is absolutely, I would say, new, but it's evolved possibly the fastest as a trend. And I was looking in through our history of whether it was RPA, whether it was whether it's bringing together workflows. I think it's emerged the fastest. However, I'll make three things and 3 points that I want to just what we've learned so far. It started off as a fancy technology of using LLMs because everybody wanted to be on the Gen AI wagon. Very quickly, it said that we will solve for it through productivity, right? We will drive significant productivity, and we itself said, half of the CPG organizations can be possibly reimagined through Gen AI. However, the reality is it's becoming much more than just productivity as an output. It has to become something that drives faster cycle times, faster innovation, faster employee experience, and consumer slash customer experience. And what we're seeing is that there have been multitude of examples where specific uh, I would say proof of concepts have been driven. But if the outcome and the end business outcome is not clear, it will fail very quickly because there are limited resources within an organization. There is a huge amount of, I would say, what Tracy was talking about, controls and compliance needed for it, because how does this go? How does it work through? So I think we've got a much stronger understanding and awareness of the applications for generative AI. And over the last 6 months, we've seen significant improvement and engagement with our clients. We are at the moment working through about 35 POCs with our clients. And one of them, just as an example, is literally focused on order management and seeing how do we look at all the orders that come in and ensuring that the order cycle time reduces from 3 days. It takes them 3 days to get the order done and validated to 45 minutes. That's one example. On the other side, internally, we're looking at how supplier contracts can be reimagined because there's freight charges, leakages. So, really looking at the margins profile and improving leakages, which can be reduced further. So, we're seeing a lot of uptake, but I must say that we are taking it a step at a time, given all the uh, commentary and all the reality around security, controllership, and data privacy.
Got it. Great. So one step at a time for sure. Okay, so lastly, we want to flip over and talk a bit about supply chain and how most of our respondents here have told us that they want to become more networked and autonomous, but they still haven't fully recovered from the impact of the pandemic on their supply chain. So it's all these things sort of happening at once. And over 70% of them said that they're not quite yet recovered. Now we have these new factors like the war in Ukraine, inflation, all these other elements that are, potentially disruptive to supply chains, even as they try to become more networked and autonomous. So, Tracy, would love your impact here on how Conagra has been faring in sort of a post-pandemic world, and if there are things that you said from the very beginning that it's all about agility. So, how are you able to build more agility into the supply chain?
Yeah, I think Conagra feels we're making really strong progress against returning to some of our pre-pandemic supply chain metrics. And just as you mentioned, agility is really the name of that game. You can't really get comfortable that things have normalized because, um, in CPG, the next challenge is still in front of you. So I think there's a few things we learned in our pandemic that we won't lose sight of. One of them I've called out before is that we can move fast and try new things and still have controls. You can automate testing, and the time to implement is faster now than it's ever been, and we need to keep that bar really high. And then two, I mentioned a little bit of the work that we're doing around digitizing our supply chain. And we are learning more and more about the power of technology and the role that that plays in our supply chain. I think something that's really important in that Tarun touched on as well is making sure that we're focused on business outcomes and not what new technology is in the news today. Sometimes you have a habit of leading with the technology and finding the business outcome. And, it's really important that we continue to push towards the business outcomes that we're looking to achieve. What business problems do we need to solve? And then know that our tool belt of technology is really, really big, and that we can apply technology to help us achieve those business outcomes. But learning to not lead with the tech has been really important to us now.
Yep, understood. So looking at the problem first or the opportunity and then figuring out which technology fits in.
That's right.
Tarun, what's been your experience with that? Can you share a little bit about how you've used tech to, help apply to some of these disruptions and create better autonomous supply chains?
I think you've hit it spot on, Melissa, when you said autonomous supply chains, because what it means is when you have to be autonomous, you need to be connected across the enterprise. So I think it starts from sales and marketing. It connects finance. It connects supply chain. So autonomously connecting everything through technology is critical. Uh, Having said that, it also brings in our view because we have seen when you start thinking about supply and demand, there is a huge, I would say, connection which is missed between the front end of the organization with the supply chain. When I say front end, it's all the sales and marketing piece. And then there is finance, by the way. Let's not forget finance because they get all the downstream data and how do you connect and predict, etc. So what we're seeing, number one, is supply chain is not no longer a function on its own. It's starting to connect broadly across the organization, whether it's upstream or downstream. The second piece that we're finding is in technology, even technology partners, a lot of them that we work with, whether it's O9, it's Blue Yonder, it's Kinaxis, etc., are starting to think about predictability of the future versus managing just now. So whether you're thinking of demand in new areas, in new places, you're building resiliency, which is the norm, which the pandemic promised you, but it's also building predictability. What if scenarios are now the strongest that they could ever be? And hence it's starting to look much more around predictiveness, omni-channel focus and direct to channel and proactive planning versus everything that was reactive. So technology is combining all of this together. Technology is bringing all of this data in one place. But I would just continue to push on is that to what effect and to drive what outcomes remains as a key point for us to continue to discuss and engage with all of our clients.
Awesome. Thanks, Tarun. So we are coming up on time actually, but I wanted to sort of round out the discussion with a final quick question, put you guys on the spot. If you could look into your crystal balls and fill in the blank, the future of the retail and CPG industries is blank. I'll let whoever wants to go first.
I'll lead. I think the future of retail and CPG is just as constant as the world that we live in, which means that it's really not. It's full of change, and to truly win, you have to be able to demonstrate a level of agility that keeps you ahead of your peers. For us, that agility fuels our capacity to focus on innovation, and innovation in the CPG world equals growth. So I think as the world continues to change, CPG will as well, and that agility is going to be more important than ever.
I'd use the future of CPG and retail is hyperconnectivity. And let me tell you why I say that is because currently the consumer product goods companies and the retailers don't work hand in hand as much as they have the data, as much as they have predictability. I feel that now with technology coming in, with data being shared, with Gen AI coming in, I think the opportunity is immense, and that to me is so exciting because if you can share data across all parts, just not the point of sale, but across inventory, thinking about that would be so much beneficial for the CPG companies and so much better for retailers and the consumers and customers that just sounds so much more exciting than where we are today. So I would use that as my answer.
I want to thank you both very, very much for joining me today. Tarun and Tracey, thanks for sharing your insights, for reacting to the data.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you very much.